I need to make sure this is up and running because I'm paranoid now. Good. All right. Do do do. Okay, great. So, um, another quick reminder. Let me just pull up my calendar here again so I can make sure I've got the date right. Final paper is due April 21st, which is like 3 weeks from Monday. Yeah, a little less than a month from now. So just that's our last day of class. That's when our paper is going to be due. Um, it's on like the progressive era stuff. So last chapter. That's the default topic. There's plenty of other stuff you can do. I mean, from literally the West until the progressive era, and really even from the progressive era until World War II. There's so much stuff we can talk about. So feel free to diversify on what you want to talk about. All right. Well, I say World War II, really even the Cold War, because hopefully, if I can get us through, there will be a video we'll be watching on the last day, or maybe reading day if I can't swing on the last day. That'll just be our Cold War material. Okay. So, Empire and Wars. This is, well, as you can see, this also includes World War One. World War One is basically the last half of this chapter, is it? Yeah, pretty much. Oh no, about the last half of the chapter. Even though most of the chapter talking about World War One is like how we dealt with it at home, because we weren't really involved in the war that much. We were there for like a year, and the war was 4 years long. So, yeah. Okay. Anyway, other stuff. Imperialism. Hoo boy. I know one of you in here are in my European history class, and we've just talked about imperialism in my European history class. This is that, but for America. America was kind of late to imperialism. Imperialism, by definition, is taking land that's not yours. I guess would be a good way to put it. I guess the technical definition is like taking land that is not adjacent to your country. So you're like taking land that is like islands out in the ocean, or land that is on like another continent. So us spreading west, was it technically imperialism? Big air quotes here. Because, they're just natives, they don't count. Us fighting Mexico for, Texas and pretty much the whole Southwest maybe kind of counted, but not especially, because we weren't like making colonies, we were just like expanding. When you start taking land in other parts of the world just to exploit that land, that's colonization, that's imperialism. So after the Civil War, again, just basically going back to the start of the semester, most of what the United States was doing was moving westward, pushing out the Native Americans, expanding, or taking the natural resources from this newly wiped out region. However, as we start getting towards the end of the 1800s, the shifting economy, social structure, and culture led a lot of Americans to believe that we should get in on the imperial game. The Europeans have been doing it for, several hundred years now, but especially in the 19th century, 1800s. The 1800s was the big era of imperialism. And, we're not Europeans, but we basically were. And a lot of people were like, hey, we need to get on board this because, well, we're going to be left behind. So, in the course of like 6 years, the United States acquired Guam, Hawaii, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico, established a protectorate in Cuba. I will get into what a protectorate means if you're not familiar. It's not great. Exercised force to build a canal through Panama, which we'll also get to. Also intervened in Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Nicaragua. And by intervention, I mean we sent in the Marines to interfere with their elections. And by interfere, I mean we had guns and told them to put somebody else in charge. Yeah. We did a lot of that. And this is just the 1800s. This isn't even talking about like the Cold War, when we did it a lot with the CIA and lots of assassinations. This was just blatant send in the Marines. So here we have this like 100-year anniversary, 1798. This was again, those of you that were here last semester. This was right before the Louisiana Purchase, so we've got like to the Mississippi River. And then 1898, we've got from Puerto Rico in the east all the way to Manila in the west, which is the capital of the Philippines. That's just kind of a stand-in for the Philippine Islands. If you don't know how far west the Philippines are, because this is not a very good representation. Hawaii looks like it's right there. Hawaii is like out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The Philippines are right underneath China. They are pretty much part of Asia. We're at, that was just a name for whatever those islands were. I think that might have been the Marianas Islands. They had different names back then. They might have been. Well, yeah, you've got the Samoa Islands here. I was gonna say Samoa Islands, but no, those are right there. Yeah, these are some of the islands that we would later use in World War II to test, or not, post World War II, to test nuclear bombs on. We're like, oh, we'll just move the people out for a little while, and then we'll move them back in, and they'll be fine. That's right. And then their skin starts peeling off, and it's like, oh, they're fine. They're happy to help out. Speaking of happy, look how happy these people are. So here we have Puck Magazine once again. Says here, school begins. Uncle Sam in his class on civilization. Now, children, you've got to learn the lessons whether you like it or not. Whether you want to or not. Just look at the class ahead of you and remember that in a little while you will be as glad as they are to be here. So this, just FYI, is how classes were done back then. Is the older students would sit in the back and the younger, newer students would sit in the front. Because when you're able to basically teach yourselves, you can sit in the back and handle things yourselves. So here we have the states, and here we have the newly acquired territories. Again, horribly racist. And this was how we saw, like, the people from these countries as, like, basically half-feral children who couldn't take care of themselves. And then, of course, you know, the Native Americans still totally unable to do anything. The Chinese not even being let inside. And African Americans just happy to be allowed to, like, wash the windows. This is, being Puck, not a positive view of this. This isn't saying, this is how we want it to be. This is Puck saying, hey, this is how they're being treated. Because back here on this blackboard, it's basically saying how Britain has taken all these colonies against their will, and how the colonies fought back. And it's essentially saying, that's what we did, and we're so proud of ourselves for fighting back against the colonial British. But now we're doing it, and it's a good thing? What's that about? But, don't worry about that. Here again we have Colombia's Easter bonnet. You got world power, which again is essentially colonialism, imperialism, expansion here. Again, Uncle Sam putting stakes all over the world. Apparently we were involved in the Canary Islands too. The Canary Islands were horribly mistreated by multiple European nations, and then I guess we got involved there too. Yeah, that was a whole thing. Apparently McKinley was the one who started on the Panama Canal. Well, he didn't start on it. The French actually started on it, and then they ran out of money. And then he was the one that was like, hey, we're going to acquire what the French had started and then finish it before he got, retired. Uncle Sam finished the Canal McKinley and make our national expansion complete in your first administration. Well, he didn't, but to be fair, it wasn't his fault. Obviously, we're going to see a whole lot of Teddy Roosevelt with the Panama Canal stuff here in just a little bit, once we get to the Panama Canal. Listen for anti-expansionists, showing how Uncle Sam has been expansionist first, last, and all the time. So you've got just America expanding over the years, and how now all the nations are anxious to be on friendly terms with Uncle Sam, because apparently this is a good thing. Yeah. Here's this horrifying Teddy Roosevelt face. So yeah, you've got these ships, this massive fleet of battleships, and here at the bottom it says peace, because yeah, all you need is the world's largest navy to have peace. And again, it's Puck, so you know it's satire. Even the doves, which typically symbolize peace, have, swords. And Teddy Roosevelt with the new diplomacy. His arbitration tended to be send in the troops. Get more into that later. Here we go. This is the map I was waiting for. So yeah, Hawaii is just kind of like out in the middle. It's literally the midpoint of the Pacific. Although technically the Alaskan Aleutian Islands go further west than Hawaii, which is weird, but by the way, that's a thing. Manila, or again the Philippines, are like underneath China. They're further west than Japan. Like they're way down here. And like one of the main reasons for wanting to get the Philippines was like as a staging post to further take advantage of China, which we will get to later as well. But yeah, so it's not like they were just sort of out here in the middle of the Pacific. The Philippines are over here. All right, that was the intro. Obviously, one of the main reasons for this expansion was economics. It's all about money. It's always about money. So again, just going back to early American history, we mostly exported agricultural products, but by the end of the 1800s, we had been sending out lots of manufactured goods. So in 1870, so right after the Civil War, American exports totaled about 500 million. By 1905, it had tripled to 1.5 billion, which is pretty significant. Also, note we're talking about exports here. This means that other countries are buying our stuff. When you piss off other countries and they tariff your stuff and they don't want to buy your stuff, you can't export stuff. Just want to mention that there. Anyway, a lot of these countries, Rockefeller Standard Oil, Coca-Cola, Kodak, and McCormick, all are exporting their products to European and Asian markets. Now, most of this was going to Europe because, they were, again, most like America. I mentioned this several times yesterday that it was the European countries that made America. Um, uh, However, American businessmen wanted to open markets in Asia and Latin America, especially China, because, well, China has a lot of people, and, well, it's a simple numbers game. If you want to sell stuff to a lot of people, well, if you want to sell stuff, you want to sell it to a lot of people, and if you want to sell it to a lot of people, you go where there's a lot of people, and, well, China's got a lot of people. Also, like, India had a lot of people, but that was Britain's baby, and you didn't even look at India without pissing off Britain. So we just left India alone. There was also Hawaii, which was seen as a similar untapped market. Not so much the population, but it was like, hey, we can go there and have them as like a market to sell stuff to, also as like a staging ground to refuel ships, because this was back when ships were still very much coal powered, so we needed like coal refueling stations, especially the Pacific. The early charge was led by missionaries in 1820. The missionaries would convert the native populations, and as we'll see going forward, the thing about missionaries is they weren't just like converting the people to Christianity, but they were also like getting the people to, quote, civilize, to become more like American. In other words, make them more amiable to American goods. This was a thing that the Europeans have been doing for decades already. Again, the big example is India for the British, where if you go into a place where people are living in grass huts, they don't want to buy a Singer sewing machine because it doesn't do them any good. But if you go in and like build houses and roads and infrastructure and, quote, civilize them to where they're wearing clothes and living in houses like the Europeans are, then they can use a Singer sewing machine and you can sell them Singer sewing machines. I mean, that's just one of many examples, but that's the example I was given back when I was an undergrad, and that's what I stick with. So part of the missionaries' mission was to civilize the people, not just for their souls, but for their pocketbook. So then the businessmen would come in behind them and exploit the sugarcane market in the case of Hawaii. However, in 1893, the white plantation owners who worked with the American ambassador and 150 Marines just decided to overthrow the government. They overthrew the native government of Queen Liliuokalani. They then tried to enter into an annexation agreement with the United States. However, the United States was currently being run by President Grover Cleveland, who was too busy just screwing everything up to pay attention. So the white planters just like kept their little feudalistic kingdom running until they could try again to become a state. So, by the way, the reason Hawaii is a state is because some jerks got Marines to overthrow the local government. And Native Hawaiians haven't forgotten that. And like to this day, Hawaii is like the worst state in terms of economic disparity. Like the native Hawaiians typically live in squalor, and then you've got like the massive hotels and resorts and stuff that are like segregated away from the native Hawaiians. And all you see is like, oh, look at the pretty beaches and the hotels and everything's so nice. Don't look at basically the favelas. Yeah. Don't worry about don't look at the squalor behind the curtain. So anyway, I just grabbed some stuff for the companies. Standard Oil. The reason it was called Standard, by the way, in case you were wondering, since this was really early on in like oil and gas production, you would get a lot of really poor gas and oil. It would have like crap floating around in it, and you didn't want to use that, especially, I mean, this is gasoline, but even like oil, you didn't want to use that. So Standard Oil was just like, hey, we've got a standard of quality we stick to, and you can guarantee that it would only have like 2% of crap floating around in it, which, was better than anybody else. So, yeah, that's why it was called Standard. It had a standard of quality. Here's Coca-Cola again. I think this was where they were gradually phasing out the coca leaves, but it was still good for the weary. I mean, today I don't know if coca leaves would be any worse than all the synthetic stuff we put in it. I like this ad. There are no game laws for those who hunt with a Kodak. The rod or gun may be left out, but no nature lover omits a Kodak from his camp outfit. Because there's hunting laws, and you can't fish in certain seasons or hunt in certain seasons, but you can always go out and take pictures of nature. That's always fun. I actually considered doing that for a short period of time when I was still a biology major. Just like going out and going to like duck blinds and stuff, and instead of shooting the ducks, taking pictures, because I thought that'd be pretty cool. But then it's just like it's really expensive and it does not pay. But it's really neat. I like that. Also, here is a compact Kodak camera, which on the surface seems funny, but like it is actually really compact. It folds back into the thing there, and it is, it's smaller than a brick, which back then was a whole lot smaller than the huge contraptions they had with like the dry plate photography and the huge flash bulbs and stuff. So this was revolutionary at the time. This is pretty fantastic, to be perfectly honest. There's your McCormick Reaper. Actually, this is a couple of them. So you've got the actual Reaper part. This is just a wagon, and then the part that actually grinds up the grain and dumps it into another wagon here. There's Queen Liliuokalani, the last queen of Hawaii. All right. So, besides the economics, because you could only get away with, we're going to take over these parts of the world for money for so long, there were also racial arguments for this expansion. Western Europeans and Americans, which, again, I can pretty comfortably classify as basically the same kind of people, saw themselves as superior to non-whites in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, and thus had a natural right for conquest. We're better than them, therefore we can take their stuff. Now, that also didn't go real well for very long, because there was actually some morality in this period of history. And some people were like, maybe we shouldn't just go in and take their stuff because we think we're better than them. Now, that said, the people who were a bit more moral about it still believed they were better than non-whites, but the idea of, therefore we should take their stuff, seemed a bit too far for them. So, they added ethical considerations to this, saying that that higher civilizations had a duty to uplift inferior peoples. Josiah Strong in Our Country proclaimed that the Anglo-Saxon race, which is to say basically the British, was superior and should spread the blessings of its Christian way of life all over the world. And again, the Christian way of life is not just the religion, but the culture, this, quote, civilization. So there was this connection between the economic expansion and missionary work. We have John D. Rockefeller Jr. and Cyrus McCormick, who created the World Student Christian Federation. sent missionaries all around the world. China was, of course, this huge target because, well, they're not Christian and they've got a lot of people and we want their money. Let's see. By 1920, missionaries were running schools, hospitals, orphanages, leper colonies, churches, and seminaries to convert the backward Chinese to Christianity and the American way of life, which, of course, was also a way to have the Chinese wanting to consume American products and opening a massive market for American goods. Now, the Chinese were very resistant to this for a couple of reasons. Once again, there's the Christian mindset of you have to get rid of all your old ways of doing things and become like us. Well, I say the Christian mindset, but like the Anglo-Saxon, your ways are inferior and you need to throw away all your old culture and become like us. But also because a lot of the early missionaries to China were Jesuits. Anyone in here familiar with the Jesuits? Yeah, okay. For those of you not familiar with the Jesuits, I like to describe them as like Jehovah's Witnesses, but with swords. They come to your door to tell you the good word, but they kick it in and they basically tell you, you will hear the good word, or they will put you in the ground. They did a lot of this during, the whole like Spanish conquistador stuff. When they weren't just killing people for the hell of it, they were converting them or killing them. The Jesuits are still around. They're not that aggressive anymore, but they were and still are called the Soldiers of Christ. A lot of Jesuits were Dominicans, and the Dominicans, I believe, are like called the Hounds for Christ, something like that, like basically the attack dogs for the Catholic Church. So yeah, that was the initial, what the Chinese initially got for missionaries. So when the Chinese are hearing more missionaries are coming, it's like, stop invading us with your crazy guys. Yeah, Jesuits were hardcore. So here is From Our Country by Josiah Strong. This is just part of it. It is not necessary to argue to those for whom I write that the two great needs of mankind, that all men may be lifted up into the light of the highest Christian civilization. So he's just, again, saying it right there. Not just Christianity, the religion, but civilization. Are first, a pure spiritual Christianity, and second, civil liberty. Again. It follows then that the Anglo-Saxon, as the great representation of those two ideas, the depository of those two greatest blessings, sustains peculiar relations with the world's future, is divinely commissioned to be, in a peculiar sense, his brother's keeper. So, because the Anglo-Saxon, again, British, or specifically for Josiah Strong, Americans, have divine right to go out and tell other cultures what to do. Because it's for their own good, y'all. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Here are some of the founders of the, I'll make sure I say it right, World Student Christian Federation. I don't know what Cyrus McCormick looks like, and I don't know what John D. Rockefeller Jr. looks like, so I'm guessing they might be standing there, or this just might be some other dudes, but these are probably some of the major founders. We've got some folks here on a ship in what I assume is Tokyo Bay. Here are some nuns at a convent. Here are some, I guess these are monks in China. Or these might be Protestant missionaries. Again, a lot of it was Catholic. Which again, while they weren't specifically Jesuit, they're tied to the Jesuits, which had a lot of the Chinese concerned. Oh boy, and then it gets weird. All right. There was also some weird gender anxieties in the late 1800s because we're in America. So after the Civil War, many Americans were worried that the next generation would not have a chance to test and strengthen their manhood. And yes, as bad as it sounds, with the Depression of the 1890s, men were unable to support their families as they once had. Rudyard Kipling suggested in his poem *The White Man's Burden* that civilized white men ought to take up the burden of spreading the light of civilization across the world. The White Man's Burden is here in the book, and apparently, both the book. I mean, I know that the Americans didn't get it, but I guess the writers of the book didn't get it. The White Man's Burden is satire. In fact, since we're talking about it here and I don't have a picture of it, I'm going to read you just a little bit out of it from the book here. Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go, bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, to your new-caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. By the way, Rudyard Kipling is English, so obviously it's satire. Take up the white man's burden, the savage words of peace, fill full the mouth of famine, and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, watch sloth and heathen folly, bring all your hope to naught. I mean, it's clearly like, it's not like, oh, this is the good thing that we're doing. Like, you're wasting your time, you're sending your kids out to die, and you're treating other people like, well, it says right here, half devil and half child. Like, yeah, it's... But it was seen as like, this is clearly how we should be doing things. Like, why don't Americans get British humor? We've not even been a country for, no, we've barely been a country for 100 years at this point. Have we really diverged that much? Also, though, women were becoming increasingly important, and it apparently scared the men in power. Women still don't have the ability to vote yet, but men like Alfred Thayer Mahan believed that women's suffrage would undermine military security because they were unwilling to use force, which, like, most of the people in my family are women, and they're the ones I'm afraid of. So, like, I don't know what Alfred Mahan's about. I really would like to put Alfred Mahan and Sigmund Freud in the same room. Like, I feel like Mahan would run out of the room crying. Like, you got something wrong with you, sir. The biggest call, though, was for military men known as jingoists. They felt in order to reassert their manhood, and again, yes, this is as bad as it sounds. Men should engage in warfare across the world. Roosevelt and Mahan were in agreement, with Mahan saying, and this is a quote that I need to make sure I get completely correct, "No greater danger could befall civilization than the disappearance of the warlike spirit, I dare say war, among civilized men. There are too many barbarians still in this world." No greater danger could befall civilization than the disappearance of war. So this dude would be like, oh, you want world peace? What's the matter with you? That would be terrible for civilization. So this led to the Naval Act of 1890, authorized construction of more battleships to join the fleet. So within 10 years, by 1900, the U.S. fleet had more battleships and cruisers, which made it the third most powerful navy in the world, up from 12th in 1880. So I'd say we were behind Britain and, I guess, France, because Germany wasn't building up yet. Germany had just become a country by 1890, and they didn't really start building up until just before World War I. So here we have Judge. Again, the white man's burden. I think Judge was a bit more blatant about it. So here we have Cuba. I can't read what's on the headband there. Some of these other ill-gotten gains. Uncle Sam, and up here is John Bull, so it's Britain's territories. Carrying them over oppression, barbarism, yeah, because we're helping them out of oppression, not oppressing them. Ignorance, vice, brutality, superstition, slavery, because we never did that. Cannibalism, etc., up to civilization. This is the white man's burden when taken literally. Here's the white man's burden when read correctly, where it's the various countries. So here again we have Uncle Sam, John Bull. I don't know what the term would be, but this is the Kaiser, Germany, and I guess specifically Napoleon III, being carried by their colonies. Because, well, that's what colonies were used for. I keep forgetting I have this picture, but it's so, I would say good. It's terrible, but it's so good as an indication of how horrible all this stuff is. What's that? Yeah, well, yeah. This is an ad for Pear's soap, which is, it's called toilet soap, but I mean, it's the whole bathroom is called the toilet in most of Europe, or the water closet in England specifically. The first step towards lightening the white man's burden, holy crap, is through teaching virtues of cleanliness. Pear's soap is a potent factor in brightening the dark corners of the earth. Again, my God. As civilization advances, while amongst the cultured of all nations, it holds the highest place. It is the ideal toilet soap. And then again, of course we have down here, it's like, oh, let me show you the civilization with these boxes of Pear's soap. Yeah, like earlier that century. Yeah. Like we just started using sewers again. And by again, I mean like since the Romans. Because the Romans used sewers and then we stopped for like 1,000 years. We forgot. We'll get more into this specifically. Here we have someone must back up in China with the, 400 million barbarians. Or America with progress and auto truck of civilization and trade, force if necessary. By the way, this is in China. And we're rolling in with all this stuff and telling them we will shoot them if we have to in their own country. But, they're the barbarians with the swords covered in blood. We'll get to that later as well. This is a little bit ahead of its time. There was some weird conspiracy theories about like what happened to the Maine at the start of the not even really the Cuban War, the War of 1898. We'll get to that a little bit later. Here is Teddy Roosevelt having fun in the Caribbean Sea with his little string of boats, because at that point the Caribbean was just our bathtub. They couldn't really do anything. Oh yeah, this is BioShock Infinite, but it fits way too well. It is our holy duty to guard against the foreign hordes for God and country. Yeah. It's really spot on for the late 1800s, early 1900s, where America is this, like, God-anointed country to rule over all the world. All right, let's get a little bit into Cuba while we still have time. We're not going to have time to get to the Philippines, but we will at least do a little bit of Cuba. Okay. So, 1895, the Cuban War for Independence began. It started around the idea of Cubanidad, this pride of nation, this, again, going back to my European history class a little bit, this nationalism that spread around, that started with like Napoleon, essentially this idea of the nation is defined by the people, not by some inbred ruler sitting in a castle somewhere. So like we saw with America and Mexico and like pretty much all of South America, the people decided that they didn't want to be under the rule of some European nation anymore. So Cuba did the same thing. Jose Marti believed liberation from Spain would give the impoverished peasants access to better land, providing racial equality for the recently liberated Afro-Cuban population, recently liberated as in 9 years before. Black Cubans such as Antonio Mastio flocked to the rebellion and filled many high-ranking positions. This would become a problem later, not for the Cuban rebellion, but when America got involved, because apparently Cuba, which again we saw the Cubans as being like backwards barbarians that can't rule their own country, they were less racist than Americans. What do you know? Anyway, we'll get to that next time. But the Cuban rebels were only about 50,000 strong, which ain't big for a rebellion, and fought against a force of about 200,000 professional Spanish soldiers. They were winning. They not only had the home terrain advantage, which, if you're not familiar with Cuba, outside of like Havana, is mostly jungle. Not only is jungle a pain in the ass to fight in, but jungles are full of disease. If you've lived on an island full of jungle all your life and you're not dead, congratulations, you're maybe not immune to the diseases, but you're at least like, what's the word? You get sick, but you don't die. The Spanish from Spain, from lovely Mediterranean Spain, come there and die in droves. And when the Spanish tried to crack down the rebellion by like burning towns, it only pissed the Cubans off more and made the rebellion stronger. Again, going back to my European history, the same thing happened in Spain when the Spanish tried to rebel against Napoleon, and Napoleon was like, well, we'll just crack down on the rebels, and it made the Spanish mad. Like, what did the Spanish think would happen to one of their colonies? Because while the Cubans aren't really Spanish anymore, they're still basically Spanish. It's just going to piss them off. They're of the same blood. You're just going to make them mad. So in 1897, Spanish government offered the rebels a lot of reforms to, for example, allow home rule while remaining within empire. This is basically what Canada has, where Canada is its own country, it's got its own prime minister, it's got its own government, it makes its own laws, but it's technically still within, not even really the British Empire anymore, the British Commonwealth. It would be like, and when I talked about this yesterday, I kept using the American Revolution as an example. It would be like if a few years into the American Revolution, if the king was like, hey, so you guys could have your country, you would just stay within the British Empire, which would have been super cool with like most of the founding fathers, early on at least. I don't know what actually would have happened if that had been offered a few years into the war, but I know early on, pretty much everybody really wanted to stay within the empire because that's where all the money was. And like immediately after the war, we were like, hey, so sorry about the war. Can we still be trading buddies because you've got all the money? However, the insurgents held out for full separation, wanting Cuba Libre, or total independence from Spain. And they could afford this confidence. When I said a lot of Spanish died from diseases, a quarter of this 200,000 died from disease. As many Spanish died from disease as there were Cuban rebels. They didn't even have to get shot. Cuba was working for the rebels. In fact, the chief military leader, General Maximo Gomez, said that his three best generals were Junio, Julio, and Augusto, which is to say June, July, and August, which is when the rains came in and made the mosquitoes go everywhere. The mosquitoes spread disease real fast. So, yeah, it made things so much worse for the Spanish. Also, the 200,000 Spanish troops were not just in Cuba. They were spread all around in Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and apparently over in Africa too. So Spain was not doing well. And finally, there was anti-war sentiment rising in Spain. They were getting tired of all these wars, of trying to hold on to colonies, because, I mean, they have been losing colonies since, like, the early 1800s. I mean, since Mexico. So it's been happening for a while now. To the point that in January of 1898, Spanish troops mutinied in Havana, which, once again, to put that into perspective, if this was the American Revolution, it would be like if the British took Philadelphia, which was our capital at the time. They had complete control of what was our capital, and the troops holding our capital mutinied against Britain because the British people back home were so tired of the war. That's how bad things were going for the Spanish. So here's some images of the Spanish getting whipped. Also, I also mentioned this last time. Technically, due to the single star, it's not Captain America, it's Captain Cuba. I know you guys have seen that online, but I just like to throw that out there. Here's an actual photograph of the Cuban rebels. So that's kind of neat. It's always neat to have an actual photograph of this time period, especially in a rebellion. Here we have, I believe this is a Spanish, I wouldn't say a general, but one of the leaders surrendering, which is good. That means all these soldiers don't have to die. Here was the American view on things, and we'll get to that here in just a little bit. So there was this idea that we needed to save Cuba not only from Spain, but from a worse fate. So this is the personification of Cuba. Spanish misrule was bad, but once it was gone, Cuba would fall into anarchy because we felt that the Cubans, being, no easy way to say it, brown people, couldn't rule their own country. It would just become chaos. We also had a couple of folks over there already during the rebellion helping out. And they were the ones sending us back information as to what was going on. And, oh no, there's black people in charge of troops. It's madness. So, let's get a little further along. The The Cubans were basically winning. I mean, I've already said that since like the start of us talking about the Cuban War of Independence. The Cubans were basically winning, and American policymakers decided that we should get involved. The war's pretty much won, but we should get in there and help so that when the war's over, we can have our hands in it. We can have control over whatever Cuba becomes. And there was a massive role that the American press played in this. Now, they didn't go on about how important it was for the economy that we get involved in Cuba, because there was obviously money to be made. They instead made it a point of American honor. William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal and Joseph Pulitzer's New York World competed in providing American readers the most lurid coverage of Spanish atrocities. They sent reporters to Cuba to cover every story they could find, and if they couldn't find any stories, they would make some up. Now, it's not to say that the Spanish weren't committing atrocities against the Cubans, because they certainly were, but they certainly also made stories up to sell papers. This became known as yellow journalism, which sparked jingoistic outrage against Spain. Who knows where the term yellow journalism came from? And it actually isn't racist, surprisingly enough. No, it's not yellow. It wasn't about yellow fever. The paper was yellow. Do you know why the paper was yellow? You get half credit for the paper being yellow. Don't worry about it. The reason the paper was yellow is back then, well, I say back then, I mean even today, my dad worked at a paper mill for like 40 years. When paper's processed, it doesn't come out white. And it has to go through a separate bleaching process to be white. But if you want to buy it really cheap, you can get it off color. And they needed to get these papers out as quickly as possible, usually multiple times a day, so they bought the cheapest possible paper they could, which was yellow. It was yellowed. It wasn't like specifically colored yellow, it was just yellow because that's what the natural color of the like paper or the wood fiber that was mulched through. So when you went to a newsstand and you saw all the newspapers, which were typically off-white, sometimes kind of gray, you know, we all see newspapers, and then you see this kind of nasty yellow-looking paper off to the side, it's like that's these guys. That's these guys talking about Cuba. That's yellow journalism. And once the American public found out about how much of this was bullshit, yellow journalism became essentially a synonym for, well, again, if you've ever been, we've all been to the grocery store, like the National Enquirer and all this, you know, tabloids there at the end of the grocery store line, which I don't know why that's even still a thing, but whatever. Yeah. Hearst published a letter that had the Spanish minister in Washington calling McKinley weak, which, whatever. The final straw, though, was on February 15th, 1898, the battleship Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, killing 266 American sailors. New York World shouted the rallying cry, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain." I don't know why we had a ship in Havana Harbor, other than waiting to start something, because we weren't involved in the Civil War. I think maybe we were blockading, because we also did that in Panama, like blockading more Spanish troops from coming in. But yeah, the ship exploded, and we're like, oh, it was the Spanish. They had mines in the harbor. Later, investigations discovered that the explosion came from inside the ship. So back then, again, when you think of like battleships, we think of like World War II battleships with the big cannons, and the artillery shells basically look like giant bullets, right? Back then, not so much. You had to put basically the bullet in first, and then you put in a powder charge. So the powder was separate. And the powder was all stored in one room. And either there was a static discharge that happened, which happens, or, and again, I know ex-Navy guys, some idiot was smoking, which was very likely. And now he might have been smoking up on the deck and it like went through a window and got into the powder room, or he might have been right by the powder room, because I know Navy guys. But it blew up and it took the whole ship out. But immediately it was like, it blew up, it was the Spanish. I don't know why the Spanish would antagonize America while they were already losing the war, but that was enough for America. Congress declared war by April 21st. War proclamation, though, specifically stated Cuba ought to be independent, but only when pacified. This is going to do a lot of lifting here in just a little bit. Because this doesn't say it ought to be independent once Spain is defeated, but when Cuba is pacified, by whatever definition we make. This is a little bit later. This was before I really had my Philippines stuff the way I have it. We'll get to that in a little bit. Apparently, we're now depicting the Spanish as like inhuman brutes, I guess. The Spanish brute as mutilation to murder. Main sailors murdered by Spain. You know, because I guess the Spanish crawled on board the ship and stabbed the sailors until the ship exploded. That's how it happened. Also, we fought in Guam for a little bit against the Spanish. We don't talk much about Guam at all in the book. We mentioned that Guam was there, and we took it from Spain, and that's about it. We mostly talk about Cuba, and then also the Philippines. Here is Pulitzer and Hearst. By the way, what they're wearing, this was, I wouldn't call it baby fashion during the time. So back in the day, before like commercial diapers were a thing, babies would basically be dressed in whatever the parents could get their hands on, scraps of cloth, or very common once newspapers became a thing, just like old newspapers. Because if the baby had to poop, you just took the newspaper off and used it as a diaper and, wadded up and threw it away. So here is Pulitzer and Hearst in, here's Hearst, I don't know, in their own newspapers fighting over who gets to start the war as babies, basically. With horrible manky feet, by the way. I hate that. Yeah. Uncle Sam, no longer will brutal Spain be supported by outraged colonies. Can't have that. We get the outraged colonies. Puerto Rico, Cuba, Philippines. Yeah, can't have that. To hell with Spain, remember the Maine. Yeah, this was a whole thing. Even got a button here. Oh, nope, not a button. Button comes later. The Maine exploding. There's Appalachian Uncle Sam punching Spain in the mouth, which seems like a real bad idea. That's how you break your hand. Remember the Maine, gosh darn you. Uncle Sam's had a little bit too much to drink. Yeah, there's what's left of the Maine. I mean, it was gone. It wasn't a mistake that it definitely went away. There again is Spain is this weird monkey man murdering everybody. All right, so we're gonna have to continue the war later, but before y'all turn your stuff in, let me stop this.